the article from yesterday about the massive drop in the Dow Jones Industrial Average and how that's really triggered by some bad investments and some bad actors in the economic world. The article from yesterday tells you in particular that a British investor who was very well known at the time tried to pull some shenanigans. And when he's caught making some bad judgment in terms of stock investments, that panics everybody else, and so people start selling stocks. They're selling stocks, excuse me, because they're like, hey, if this super big time investor is pulling these type of shenanigans, then he must not have a lot of faith in the market, and so they panic. They think that their stock prices are going to, go into a free fall, and so when you sell in a panic, remember, that's bad because people will automatically think something's wrong with the stock, even though there may be nothing wrong with it. And so it triggers a sell off. Everybody's trying to sell stocks and nobody wants to buy them. And so they're having to keep lower the price. All right. And so there's this massive sell off. And even though regular folks, okay, even though regular folks don't have a lot of money invested in the stock market, the wealthier people in society are crushed by this. And you're going to see that the stock market crash is going to lead us into something even more dreadful. All right. The stock market crash is just a first in a series of really bad events that are what we refer to as the Great Depression. Okay. Uh, a depression, when we talk about an economic depression, our baseline definition is it is a severely slowed economy, okay? A severely slowed economy, all right? Usually with high unemployment, okay? That's a depression, right? Think of actually being depressed, like in the psychological sense. You'd be depressed if you lost all your money. That's the best way to remember a depression. It's a really slowed down economy with high levels of unemployment. Okay? Now, let's talk about the causes of the depression. All right? And the first big cause of the Great Depression are problems with the banks. All right? Uh, when the stock market crashes in 1929 and the Dow Jones Industrial Average keeps falling, banks are going to get hurt. Okay? And here's the reason why. One of the things that was happening, and let me show you this graphic first here. The number of banks, look at the number of banks over time, and this was getting to be a problem. This is the banks in number of thousands in the United States, and you can see that in 1926, there are over 25,000, probably in the neighborhood of 27, 28,000 banks in the United States. And you can see that number is going to significantly decrease every single year until 1934, all right? That thousands of banks are going out of business. Okay, let's talk about, first of all, why they go out of business. All right, here's what was happening. One of the reasons that banks have to fail as a business, or why they go out of business, is that they had invested a lot of money in the stock market. Okay, they made bad investments in the stock market. All right. Hold on, I didn't mean to bring that graphic up at the moment, but here's what happens. When you take your money to the bank, okay, you anticipate the bank says, look, this is a safe place to keep your money, okay? And we like that you want to keep your money here, okay? Because we're providing you a safe place to keep your money. So the bank says, we're going to keep your money safe. So if I take $10,000 to the bank, I say, hey, I want an account here and I want to be able to withdraw the money anytime I want. All right. And the bank says that's great. Now, they know that I'm not going to use all $10,000 for, at any one moment. Okay. And so banks don't keep a lot of cash on hand. What they're going to do with my money is they're going to invest it in something else. Usually, what banks will do is they'll loan out that money to like a business at a nice interest rate so that they get money back plus interest. So when they take my $10,000, they're probably going to take about 8 or 9,000 of that and maybe loan it out to a local business that wants to get started. Okay? And that business has to pay back the loan plus interest. That's how banks make money. All right? The problem was, though, is that banks were taking that money and they weren't necessarily loaning it out to businesses all the time. They were investing it in the stock market. And when the stock market tanks, when the stock market crash hits, those banks lose a lot of money. And what happens when I show up and want to withdraw some cash? They don't have it. Okay. And when they don't have cash, when I can't access my money, I am furious. All right. And I start telling all my friends, hey, you better go down to your local bank and check it out because they didn't have my money when I wanted. And so that triggers what we call a run on the banks. Okay. And this is what this picture is right here, a run on the local bank. People hear that banks don't have a lot of cash on hand, that they lost money in the stock market crash. Okay. And this is a problem because they're like, hey, I got to get there and withdraw my money as fast as I possibly can. All right. And banks are like, oh crap, we got a problem. And if the bank can't give the people their cash, number one, you're going to have really angry citizens. Number two, that bank will have to close. Now, here's where things get crazy, and this is why the stock market crash is going to partly affect the regular people in society, even though they never owned any stock. All right. These banks fail because they don't have enough money to give out to their people, their customers, and the banks have to close. Now, if I had $10,000 deposited in that bank and the bank closes, I don't get that money back. I'm just screwed. Okay. And that's going to affect regular people in society. All right. I never had any money in the stock market, but I had put my money in this bank because I thought it was a safe place. All right. A safe place to store my money. All right. Little did I know they were making dumb investments with bank money in the stock market. All right. And banks, look, one of the reasons why they were putting money in the stock market is they thought it was a guaranteed win. They thought they would always be able to make some money off the stock market. All right. And when you get a run on the banks, though, and this is why banks fail, people panic and all try to withdraw their money at the same time, and there's simply not enough cash. Okay. People are angry because they want their money and the bank doesn't have it. That's a real problem. Now, for some people, like somebody my age, losing all the money in your bank account would be really frustrating. All right. That would be very frustrating. However, I can always go out and earn more because I'm still young enough to work. A lot of the people who get affected the most are people who work low income jobs or people who are old and retired. They can't work anymore, or they're already working and they hardly have anything. Average Americans, retirees, they get crushed by these bank failures. Right? Imagine your life savings wiped out because of bad business by the banks. Now, today there's things that we have that protect us from that, and we'll talk about how later on the government will correct these problems. There's certain things that banks can and can't do, but make no mistake, bank failures are going to be a big problem. And they're not just a problem because they lose their savings. Here's what else is a significant issue. Okay. When banks fail, they're not able to provide loans to people or businesses. And think about this in your lifetime, you will probably need a bank loan for two major purchases. If you want to buy a car, if you're buying a brand new car, or if you're buying a house. All right. And you're going to need a bank to give you a loan. Well, if there are less banks out there, that means that less people have access to those important loans. And the banks that still exist, what do you think their policy is going to be towards loaning out money? Do you think they will be more careful or less careful about who they loan money to? And the answer is way more careful. They're not going to take a risk loaning you money if they have any thought that you won't be able to pay it back. Okay? So banks are failing. This is the big cause of the Great Depression, right? Without banks to loan out money to people, and without banks having a safe place for people to put their money, they're in a jam. Okay. This will also tell you too, older people who lived during the Depression era, and there are some of them that are still old enough to remember, because they didn't trust banks. The rest of their lives, they would hide money in places in their house. Like, have you ever seen cartoons or old movies where people hide money in their mattresses? Uh, that's what people did back then. Or they would hide money in coffee cans and bury them out in the yard because they never fully trusted banks. My grandmother, when she died, my dad was like, we have to go through all her stuff because she would hide money around the house. like in our sock drawer, inside jacket pockets, we'd find 10, 20, $50 bills. And I think all told, when we went through her stuff, we found $500 of money just randomly hidden around the house. All right. So, that era, it took them a while to build trust again in banks. Okay. So that's one of the causes of the Depression. All right. Second cause of the Depression is what we call overproduction by business. Okay. Businesses made mistakes in the way that they did business. Now, remember, throughout the 1920s, they were producing a lot of goods like radios, refrigerators, uh, you know, automobiles, things that were luxury items, and people were buying them left and right because these are brand new products. But here's the problem with that, okay? Many of these businesses, they made a terrible mistake. They kept producing the same number of radios that they did in the previous year, or sometimes even more, because they thought people would continue to buy them. Well, the problem with that is that these individuals, like once you buy a radio or a washing machine or an automobile, it's going to last you a while, all right? That you don't need a new one the very next year. And so what happened is a lot of these businesses go out of business because of poor planning. They produce too many. So, for example, if we sell, once everybody in the country has a radio, well, they don't need to buy a new one. And so ultimately, a lot of businesses overproduce and they have warehouses full of products, all right? And at the same time, they think that people are going to buy them, but they never do. And a lot of businesses go out of business because of bad decision making, all right? And here's another problem. This is how this is going to affect the Depression here, too, right? When businesses overproduce and they go out of business, everybody there loses their job, okay? And those people lose their job. They've been hit by bank closures. So now they have no savings and they don't have a job, all right? And other people are in the same boat. So you have the same number of people in a community in the workforce and not nearly as many jobs. All right. Now, another problem for the Depression, another cause for the Depression, government policy, bad government decisions. Okay. The president at the time, Herbert Hoover, people expected him to take action, and so one of the things in which he did was he started putting tariffs on imported goods. And if you don't know, a tariff is just a tax on an imported good. And the idea was to encourage Americans to buy more American stuff. So, like, let's say we put a tax on some type of, let's say we put a tax on, coffee from an international, conglomerate, a business from overseas. All right, that tariff is going to make the coffee more expensive, and so hopefully we will buy American-made products. All right. Now, that sounds all well and good until when we put tariffs on goods from other countries, what do they do to our goods? And the answer is they put tariffs on our stuff. Okay. And it just slows down trade and it actually makes the economy worse. Okay. Farmers get hit by this as well because the tariffs on their products are a big deal. If you remember, after World War I, we were supplying the international community with a lot of food, especially Europe, because they got hit hard by the war. And now farms in France and Germany had largely been rebuilt. And even though they were still buying stuff from Americans, American products were being overproduced, and they're going to be taxed now too. So farmers get hit hard by this. And Europe's like, hey, we appreciated you feeding us after the war, but our farms are almost back to where they were. And if you're going to put tariffs on our stuff, we'll put tariffs on your stuff. Okay. So putting these tariffs in place was a really bad decision. Okay. Now, also, a terrible mistake made by Herbert Hoover was he changed the money supply. The amount of physical dollars, like the actual dollar bills in circulation, uh, his mindset was, hey, we're on a gold standard. If we take money out of circulation and decrease the money supply, it'll make whatever dollars are left more valuable. Okay, that was his thinking, right? Unfortunately, it didn't work that way. What people needed at the moment was actually to increase the money supply. They needed money in order to purchase things because money was already tight. Banks had lost all their money. All right. These two decisions by the government, tariffs and a decrease in the money supply, terribly hurt regular people. All right. Now, one other cause for the Great Depression was bad habits from consumers, meaning the regular people. Okay. One of the problems that we had is that Americans were making a lot of purchases on credit. All right. Americans always thought they would have the ability to get another job, to make more money, or to dip into their savings. And so they purchase things on credit. Like it's like anything else you get today. Maybe you put a down payment on it and you pay from month to month. And as long as you have a job or access to money, that works. Okay. But what happens if you lose your job? What happens if your bank loses all your savings? Americans had not planned for that. Okay. And so the problem is that maybe you buy an automobile and you put a down payment on it and you're paying the rest off from month to month. Well, what happens when you don't have any money anymore? You're going to lose that automobile, right? It gets repossessed. And so ultimately, credit purchases crush Americans. And you have to realize up until the 1920s, most Americans did not want to buy things on credit. They said, look, it's kind of an insult. They did not want it if they could not get it by paying cash or by paying for it all at once, right? And bad decisions by Americans are going to cause the depression to become worse than what it is. Now, these are your four major causes. And look, you could talk to historians and economists who disagree about what causes the depression, but most people will agree that these issues definitely play a role in it, right? And the bad habits from consumers is still a problem today. People, especially younger Americans, live beyond their means. They buy things and purchase it on a credit card thinking they'll be able to pay it off later. All right. Well, what happens when you buy something on a credit card and most people don't realize if you don't pay your credit card off every month, there's an interest. And usually credit card interest is like 20%. So if I spend $100 on my credit card this month and don't pay it, then it'll be $120 next month. All right. And that stuff adds up very quickly and it affects your credit rating. And so we still have some of the same problems today. Most Americans really don't have a lot of savings either, even if they do have money in a savings account or a bank account. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. These are your major causes of depression. You'll also get an article tomorrow kind of rehashing this. So, guys, I hope you're doing okay at home and stay safe. If you got any questions, give me a shout.